1983, the state officially took over this landfill site on behalf of the town to mitigate risk that the town might incur due to some contaminants or just, the things that were put in the landfill. So just reviewing some of the damage that occurred, you can see in the picture there's a break in the curb and gutter line. So the new curb and gutter was more towards the front. That was the damage that was incurred during Hurricane Matthew. So the fault line that occurred during Matthew, the same fault line occurred again. It was just more extreme this time. So we've got about a 4-inch drop at this location. You can see where the connection point is from the old curb line to the new curb line. And about a 4-inch drop, and you can see towards the bottom right of the picture, there was actually a separation. So it kind of looked like an earthquake happened. So different pictures, I think this is standing in the same spot. So this picture is facing back towards the gas station, and this picture is facing back away. So this is the more extreme pictures where this massive land appears that it's settled. Again, about a 2-foot drop. On the left-hand side, the drop is closer to 12 inches. So looking back at the history of the cemetery, there was no noticeable settlement. Hurricane Matthew happens, there's minor settlement, and then Hurricane Florence hits, and it was a significantly larger storm. So this is just data taken from towns throughout eastern North Carolina, and your town gets the prize for the most rainfall in the whole Hurricane Florence. So keep in mind that the storm that FEMA recognizes as a pretty extreme storm, it managed to use about 10 or 11 inches of rain. Now this 35, almost 36 inches of rain did occur over 2 days. So this was a more significant rainfall than Matthew, and then it happened back to back, 2 days in a row. So I was curious, I went back to historic information. What's the worst tropical cyclone that's occurred on the East Coast? And this lists the worst storms ever. So going all the way down to Floyd. Floyd was a major storm. It was 24 inches of rain. And it looks like Elizabethtown is the winner again. So I think the only marked rainfall event that's higher than this was recorded in Texas on the storm that occurred over a 5-day period. So it had a significant amount more rain in this, but it was over 3 more days than this was. So this is also important to take into context because we can understand that it's rainfall that's causing this. So that helps us determine what might have happened and also what it might do to take to fix this. So this is the hatched area that we're showing where the depressions occurred. So again, just to recap, the large sinkhole that occurred in the cemetery had about a 2-foot drop on one side and 12 towards the gas station and about 7 on the other side. And the most extreme shift in the ground at the road was about 14 inches. So some of the facts and our findings, we asked the geotech company to do soil boring logs. So what they do is they have a drill rig that drills into the ground, and we had to go about 30 feet deep. So this is what they call a split spoon drill rig. So they drill down, and as they pull the rig up, they can actually open up half the casing and pull the soil out and analyze it. So they can create logs for us to know what's made up underground. We were suspecting that some of the old landfill could have encroached onto this old cemetery site. We didn't have data going back that far. So it was very likely, since the sites were adjacent to each other, that there could have been some fill that occurred that may have been garbage, debris, refuse. We were thinking that this could have been an area that had old logs, roots, stumps buried, and the roots and stumps just decayed over time, had a void, and as the groundwater flooded the voids, the earth just settled straight down. So the geotech engineer was able to help do some of the investigative work to start building a case of understanding what happened. But again, we had 4 soil borings all on the road, and then 3 back about the midpoint of the cemetery and 2 back at the corner. So they produced a geotech report. This is an example of the boring logs they produced. So the key thing from this is I've highlighted the area in yellow that indicates that out of all the soil borings that they've located, all of them had sandy soil present, and boring logs 2 through 9 had an average of about 9 to 10 feet of sand fill added to the site. So the yellow shows how far you have to go down to till you get to firm existing original ground. So that's important as we build up our case, that understanding what happens. So sand is a very common material around this area, but isn't always the best and the proper fill material for building construction sites. So just to expand on that a little bit, anytime you would do a new project where you have to add fill to a slope, you basically would stair step this with grading operations. So this ensures that the new soil you add back on top sits on a level ground. So an analogy I would have is if you have steps, you could actually put stuff in your house on steps, books, shoes, and it's not going to go anywhere. But if you put the same type of stuff on a sliding board that's at the same slope, it's going to want to slip and slide down. So two things that we know, well, one thing that we know for sure and one we suspect is that the proper fill material that we would have now, if we would spec this out for a new construction project, would be more of a cohesive or a clay soil, not sand. And we would also grade this out for flat spots to put this on. So one we know is true, that it has sandy soil, that's not ideal for fill slopes. The other one I suspect is probably true is that the sand was added to this site, and that's the way it was added is also contributing to some of the movement of the sand that's out there. So what we found is that the surveying that Lloyd Walker had done historically going back, he had added monumentation to the cemetery about 3 years ago. Several monuments up the street and several monuments towards the back, just identifying key locations in the numbering system within the cemetery number 2. And the red arrows point in the direction that the actual monuments that they surveyed 3 years ago has moved. So Queen Street has actually moved about half a foot closer to the river. And the areas towards the back of the cemetery have actually moved between 1.5 and 2 feet closer to the river. So you can see the arrows are moving sliding directions towards the river, and they're not moving sliding towards the landfill. So seeing the soil boring logs, they would have actually showed if they had organic material, which they did. It was all coarse, loose field sand. And so we ruled that out, and the sliding motion wasn't towards the landfill, it was towards the river. So this is keying us down on more exactly what happened. I will say, if we had more data, we would be able to say more conclusively what our answer is to what happened, but we didn't have fixed monumentation points from several years back towards the woods line. So I suspect that the woods line hasn't moved, and just the area where it had fill sand did move. So when we first walked the project site, me and Eddie walked down in the woods, and there was no evidence that anything had shifted or moved. I've been to a lot of sites where the trees are actually leaning in the direction of the slide. We didn't see anything present that would indicate anything in the woods that had moved, but we do have a fixed monumentation point at the bottom corner of the property. But Lloyd was not able to survey that because it's about 6 feet underwater, so the river's still up. So if we were able to survey that monumentation at the bottom of the corner and it hadn't moved, then our conclusion is pretty definite. Right now, we would like to leave off that we're pretty sure about this, but we would like to get more data to say conclusively exactly what happened. But for the timing of our report, we're going to move on with our assumptions the way they are. So this is just an example of a cross section. So you can see that we've got a fill material that's light brown added to the existing material that was out there. So this was the dark brown would be the site 150 years ago. And then portions of cypress coming down to the gas station was an old valley line where the old creek ran. So we can go back to the geotech report logs and see that different elevations of the existing soil before the site was developed had more fill than others. So we've got a non-cohesive sandy soil on top of a firm silty clay layer. So another analogy is if you go to the beach and you pack beach sand in a bucket, turn it over, and you pull the bucket up and it stays just right. You add a little bit of water to that, turn it over, and it won't work. It will just slump down. So we know that the rainfall events got the ground super saturated, and it's the same thing with the bucket at the beach. Once you add a lot of water to it, it's not as stable. So the only thing that would change your mind is the point at the bottom. If the point at the bottom has moved a little bit as well, then that might mean that the whole area is moving at the same time. But we suspect that the ground that was out there originally has not moved. And again, from the points that we've surveyed in the cemetery, we know we've got a drop in certain areas and a slide in certain areas. So the red line that we have added indicates that the ground is just shifted towards the river. So to review the facts and the findings that we know for sure, there were no observed settlement issues through the history of the cemetery up until Hurricane Matthew. We did have significant soil movement in Florence, and this was a very, very extreme, very, very rare rain event. We know we have fill sand in the cemetery, which isn't the ideal fill soil. So our hypothesis at this point is that we've got what you would call, from a geologist standpoint, a rainfall-induced localized shallow slope failure within the sandy fill soil. So if you do any research, you can find a lot of sites that were built that the soils weren't compacted correctly or they didn't use the right fill. So these issues are similar. You can do a Google search on these keywords right here and find 50 pictures that look exactly like the landfill does. So from everything that we think, this is the key issue. So that's important because if we understand what the causes are, we have a better idea of what to implement for solutions. So at this point, we can move on to the review of the goals. So when you have goals of any project, just like you would have goals personally, let's say if you're building a house, your goal has to be in line with the budgets that are available. So with this project, the first goal would just be to repair it back to its pre-Hurricane Florence condition. So with that, that's the least expensive goal. However, it doesn't eliminate risk at all. If you get significant rainfall against the issues that you've seen today could occur again. So within our goals, we've got a medium range. So we want to implement solutions, and I want to say this carefully, to reduce the frequency and severity of this occurring again. So when you have an engineering fix, you would design it for a certain engineering parameter, but you couldn't guarantee that if you got a 36-inch rain again, that it wouldn't occur again. I mean, that's such an extreme event. The last is, what solutions could you implement to do as much as you can to remove the risk entirely? So again, this will be a very, very expensive alternative that might be the right one. And I put here, it may not be eligible for funding assistance. What I would mean more there is it may be more challenging due to the extremely high cost. So when we submit this for funding, they're going to have to look at the different drain alternatives. And as a team, working with the funding agencies, come up with the best solution for the funding that's actually available. So that's the key setup on the goals and how we approached the alternatives to match those. So to go with the first goal, repair to pre-hurricane conditions. So this would simply be going to the locations of settlement within the cemetery, either raising up the headstones or moving them off to the side, and adding fill soil back to the depression, residing and repositioning the headstones. So it would look like it did a year ago. And back in the street, it would be do what you need to do to repave the street to get it looking back into pre-hurricane conditions. So again, as mentioned before, this gets you back to a usable cemetery that looks like it did before, but it doesn't really do anything to eliminate the risk of this occurring again. Our medium range goal, as far as cost, will be to implement a solution that would reduce the frequency and the severity of this occurring again. So part of our solution is knowing that if this is a rainfall-induced event, the key thing that you could do is minimize rainfall. But that's not possible. You get the rainfall that you get. When we do these projects in our engineering industry, we have certain design events that we design. Roads have to meet a 25-year design storm. Large bridges over large riverine systems have to meet a 100-year storm. Well, we wouldn't necessarily design a solution for the cemetery that would take 36 inches of rain. That's a pretty abnormal event. So we would implement solutions that would reduce the frequency and severity of that happening. So again, with the cemetery improvements, it would be the same thing as we mentioned in alternative one. In addition to that, we could install an under drain system that would lower the permanent groundwater elevation. So when the rainfall events did occur, instead of the groundwater that naturally sit 5 feet below the ground, it would be at 7 feet below the ground. So that gives the soil some ability to hold a little bit of the water before it becomes super saturated. So this would occur in the cemetery and the road as well. So the road improvements would include the same alternatives as number one, where we repair the road back. But before we rebuild the road, we could add a series of under drain systems along the road too. So this is going to capture all the shallow groundwater, get into a drainage system, and out around the project. In addition to that, we've got overland flows. So we've got overland stormwater runoff coming from the areas upstream of Queen Street. So if we can get that water to a closed system and arrive around the site instead of infiltrating in the ground, that would help as well. So the final goal, eliminate the risk of settlement in the future. So we've broken this into like an A and a D. So both solutions meet this goal, but they're a very different approach. So the first solution is if this entire portion of the cemetery is built on sandy soil, that could shift with high rain events, and you want to remove any risk entirely, one solution would be to relocate the cemetery to a new location. So this isn't what we're suggesting, this is just an alternative to put in the report at this point. So the process to do this is what's called disinterment and reinterment. So this is a very complicated process. There's an expense to it, there's a cost per gravesite. But within the report that we would write, there's a lot of negatives to this that don't have a price to them. So this is why this wouldn't be our preferred alternative. It's just an alternative to discuss. So the cemetery would just be relocated. So the fact that it's been built on sandy soil that's subject to shifting during extreme high rain events wouldn't be a concern if there's no grave sites there. And the road improvements could be converted to open space as well as build cemetery. Again, not something we're suggesting, but it's within the host of options that are available. So the part B to this serves the same goal. Will be to apply an engineering solution, and that would include installing a retaining, or I guess in-the-ground retaining wall system at the lower end of the cemetery. So if the earth is going to shift during high rain events, basically a sheet pile wall, we've got what we call a secant wall. There are different construction techniques, methods. Once we get into the actual engineering part of that, there's other types of walls that will be available, but the goal would be to find the most cost-effective wall that would hold the soil back and prevent it from shifting. So both of these alternatives are extremely costly and would meet the goal, but again, as compared to the alternative number two, would be very, very expensive on a capital basis. So the next steps, again, this isn't final. We're coming to a point where we're concluding our efforts. The next step that we're moving on to is to draft a report. So a part of the meeting today is to gain buy-in and acceptance from the town that our goals and our draft alternatives are something that you would want to see us complete in a report. The next step, once we have concurrence from everyone that those alternatives and goals are appropriate, would be to actually finalize the report. The next step after that is to work with our funding coordinator to meet with different funding agencies to determine which portions of the project will be eligible and which alternatives will be eligible, and trying to find that right balance between the best solution with the funding that the town can get approved for. And at that point, I can open it up to questions. Who has
If any of y'all got questions, if you'll raise your hand, we will try to take one of them at a time.
Yes. Yeah, so I can start off by saying, if I have the answer, I'll be glad to give it to you. If it's an answer I don't have, then I feel comfortable giving you a hypothesis of why it might have occurred, or what the answer might be, I can do that. And if I don't know the answer, I'll say that. But if you ask me questions that I don't have an answer for, part of the goals today as well is to write those questions down and to try to get those addressed in our report.
If you would state your name when you get up for our records, just state your name.
Mike Boss. Is it safe to visit the cemetery now?
I beg your pardon, I was talking.
Is it safe to go to the cemetery to look at the grave sites now?
Yeah, based on our understanding, the only way this would shift again is if you got another 30 inches of rain or 15 inches of rain. There's no reason to believe that the soil can continue to
So it should be settled right now.
I think it's settled where it's going to settle to. And if you clean it up, I don't think you're going to see it move again unless you get a significant rain.
All right, thank you.
Scott, let me just say, that's encouraging for us to hear. I think it's probably encouraging for them to hear that it's stable and that there's a possibility it can be fixed. In dealing with other places, I know you said if you Google it, you will find other, have you talked with other folks who have had similar situations and how did they handle it?
Yes, yeah, so the neat thing about the internet, you can do a Google search or Yahoo image search and you can find very similar situations. With this also, you can just see what's occurred in the past and what have others done to prevent this solution from happening. So a lot of the times this has happened on new development where the soil shifts under a very expensive building. So the geotech solutions that we've recommended that are available are generally applied to the actual building itself. Example would be a Lowe's or Home Depot improvement store that's built on 20 feet of fill. Well, the building might see some cracking and settlement, and the parking lot might see some as well. Well, there's not a tremendous risk if the parking lot settles a bit, but they will put those more expensive fixes into the foundation of the building and can get those fixed. So, the underground retaining wall at the bottom is a common solution. We did change directions when we were looking at this. We thought it was the soil had settled straight down into voids or maybe migrated to the landfill. That changed when we got the survey from Lloyd. Knowing that the ground shifted and slid gave us more definitive proof of what happened. But when we got that information, we actually did reach out to the geology department at NC State. It was bad timing to call them because they were on their break. But I did get in touch with two different contacts. One of them agreed to meet with me. He wasn't going to be available till this week, but as we finalize the report, we have reached out to experts in the geology department just to see from their experience. I think the one that I'm going to meet with actually is his PhD study specializes in landslides. So if you look up the definition of landslide, it can include a lot of different things. One could say that what's happened here could qualify as a landslide. It was just a different scale. A lot of landslides that you would think of would be in the mountains, and that does occur. And we did some research and reached out to landslide specialists in the mountains just to get their understanding of what happened. But it's a little bit different than what we have here. So we're going to go back and we will meet with the geology department contacts as we're wrapping up the report. So, who has the next question? Yes.
Ellen Adams, Brian. If you have a plot there that's not been used yet, you own one, but it's not been used yet, if you needed to use a plot now, is the town going to allow someone else to be buried there?
That is a good question. I think that we have to handle on an individual basis, depending on where the actual plot is. So with the solutions that we have in mind, knowing that there's the range of solutions based on the risk that the town's able to accept in combination with the funding, there may need to be a process moving forward where the town carefully evaluates development not development, but use of the cemetery moving forward, 10, 15, 20 years out. So again, that would have to be handled on an individual basis.
You say there's some locations that you'll never be able to turn anybody on? Or you say just until we
Until we understand for sure what the solution is actually going to be. If the town gets approval for the most expensive fix, then you'll be able to use the cemetery's plan from now on.
Can the 275 grave site, I mean, there's not 275 people buried on that side of the grave site. Are there a total of 275 grave sites on that side, on the river hill?
That's an approximation number based off the use that's there, but that doesn't include grave sites on the upper side of Queen Street.
It's on the other side of the street.
Within the vicinity, because the sample did occur on both sides.
So of those 275 sites, how many have been purchased? I mean,
We have some available sites that have not been sold. Most, if not all of them, are on the lower side.
Okay, next, anybody? Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Jim Gantz. Do any of your plans take into consideration, because of climate change, storms like Matthew and Florence might become more frequent, and we could be seeing these every few?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we're working with a lot of towns and cities on the East Coast, and what you're referring to is coastal resiliency. And that's all the rainfall events that we design by are based on statistics from rainfall that we've received, that we've been able to record, maybe for the past 50, 70, 100 years. So, yes, we are aware that, you know, some of the rainfall events may be occurring more frequently. However, for this, you know, we still aren't designing